Well, I'm here with Reverend Carl McCann, District Superintendent of British Isles South, Timothy Award recipient of 2018, background in youth ministry, local church ministry, general board member. He kind of hits a lot of boxes, great mind, master parliamentarian. I love watching him in General Assembly, just getting to the heart of how we're supposed to speak about things. So, brilliant mind. Excited to have him. But welcome this morning. Where are you zooming in from, and how's everything going?
Hi, yeah, it's great. Thank you for the invitation. Really good to have this opportunity. Yeah, I'm coming in from Manchester today, where I was born and bred. Most people know it for Manchester United, although if you're into your music, it's pretty famous for that as well. And
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So Manchester.
And when I was looking, when I was sleuthing on you a little bit, Ashton Underline, am I saying that right? Ashton Underline,
Yeah,
is that that's a borough or a suburb or however they call that of
yeah,
Manchester? So that's the church you grew up in, is that right?
that's right. Yeah, I was born and bred there. My grandfather was the minister when I was a child. He retired when I was a teen, and then there was a few ministers in between before I became the pastor there. And now I'm the district superintendent, so I'm just a member of the church and a
Yeah.
pretty poor attendee because I tend to be in a different church every week. But yeah.
So where for our listeners, what is kind of the geographic zone of your region of your district? What do you cover
Um,
there?
So you've got the British Isles, United Kingdom, various names. It's all confusing. Three countries, four countries, one country. There's different ways of doing it. And so about 75-80% of England and the whole of Wales make up the British Isles South District. And then there's a little slither at the top of England and the whole of Scotland and Northern Ireland that make up the rest.
Okay. And then Manchester, I've never traveled there, but I've heard its history of Manchester was very industrial, kind of more
Yeah.
laboring class. Uh, it, it- how is that shaped today? Is it similar? What, for our listeners, what is Manchester like? The city of Manchester.
Yeah, well, I mean, I often joke when I travel around the world, just ask people to take a look at all of the pollution which they see and say it all started in Manchester. We were the ones that started doing things on an industrial scale and didn't realize the things we were unleashing. And so it used to be a city of pea soup and fogs, thick fogs, and the whole skyline was just big, tall red brick chimneys with all of the mills. Now most of those have been either knocked down or converted into apartments, and now it's quite a modern cosmopolitan city. A good place to live. Not a massive tourist city, particularly apart from the football, but it's a good place to live.
And Nazarene Theological College is right there. Do you have a lot of connections with the district and the college being there? What's that relationship like?
Yes, I mean, if you're a Nazarene in the British Isles South District, you've probably been to the college. The relationship's very close. So I grew up playing in the grounds there as a kid at various events, attending the graduations, and then attended there for both my BA and my masters, and then yeah, really an unbroken, continuous relationship with the college. Yeah, beautiful location, really is.
And what's the history of Manchester and the Church of the Nazarene? Was that one of the first areas in the UK to have a Nazarene church, or what's the background there?
Well, the British Isles used to be one district, and the of course the Nazarene Church globally is quite unique in that most churches are formed by splits, whereas our history is of different groups coming together to form a church, which is quite beautiful, really. That
Yeah,
emphasis on
yeah.
unity rather than disunity, and the British Isles is like a micro holiness denominations, and so they merge Church of the Nazarene, Calvary Holiness, and International Holiness Mission, and they merged to all become the Church of the Nazarene. So each church around the district will have its roots in one of those three strands, with one or two exceptions that perhaps just came in as an individual church that wanted to join the movement. As far as the Manchester one goes, I don't really know which was the first church, which are the oldest, and it's kind of hard because churches often have kind of two birth dates: the date the church was started but then perhaps the date that it joined the Church of the Nazarene. So my home church was started in the late 1700s as an independent mission hall, trying to reach out into the red light district of the town. It was always intended to just be a mission hall, but the ladies that were able to give up prostitution, they weren't able to cope with the culture of the existing churches. And so the mission hall essentially just became a church in its own right. And then 100 and odd years later, joined the Church of the Nazarene. And most churches will have that dual history.
And does Manchester, the city itself, have an older connection with the Methodist movement? It being an industrial town, was there connections there?
Yeah,
going
pretty
into
much.
Manchester?
Pretty much anywhere industrial in England and Wales, there will be some sort of Methodist heritage. So just down the road from us, there's a plaque on the wall that says Wesley preached here, and so that's really part and parcel of not of Britain as a whole, because the Wesleyan revival didn't really reach up into Scotland, but certainly English history.
So if you could share biographically about your call to ministry. I watched the video before we got on here of you talking about how you started youth ministry. Your parents were maybe going to have you go to a different church, but you stayed at that one. But if you could just share kind of how God called you into ministry, it seems like it was kind of also called out of someone needs to fill this role. But what did that look like for you?
And we'll be right back.
Hi, my name is David Gilmore. I'm the pastor of Clyde Church of the Nazarene in British Isles South District, and I'm the author of the Foundry's Advent devotional resource for 2025, Hope of All the Earth. We live in a culture that's not designed for faithful waiting. Our world teaches us to demand instant gratification, and if we're not careful, we'll be swept along so quickly that we won't even notice. But into that relentless bullet train of life breaks the season of Advent, in which we're taught to slow down, to pause, to wait. Because the voice of Advent tells us again and again, not yet, not yet, not yet, but soon. And so the season of Advent brings a message of hope for the hopeless, peace for the restless, joy for those in despair, and abundant, extravagant, divine love for the unlovely and unloved. Hope of All the Earth is a journey for the entire faith community, offering daily reflections, discussion questions, and a space for journaling. It provides resources for pastoral, youth, and children's ministries to engage together, and it's available in both English and Spanish. We'd love you and yours to be a part of this journey of faithful, hopeful anticipation, and you can find more information in today's show notes.
My parents had a fantastic upbringing, really blessed by both my mum and my dad. But both of them had been raised pretty poor. My dad in pretty dire poverty as a result of alcoholism and domestic violence in the family. His was a non-Christian home. My mum, quite the opposite story. She was a pastor's kid, so had a lovely, loving home. But pastors in those days were lucky to be paid, and so didn't have much. And so I always had this view that my parents had struggled in childhood. I was getting pretty decent grades at school, and I had this kind of desire to basically try and earn as much as I possibly could. I won't lie, to enjoy life myself, but also I wanted to give my parents a really good old age where they were financially comfortable, and that was really where I was quite comfortable with. And then in my mid to late teens, I was on a youth camp, and I heard the testimony of a minister. And it wasn't identical, but there was a lot of similarities. And I really felt as if the Spirit was speaking to me and saying, there's a lot of good in what you're trying to do, but is this what my will is for your life? Have you explored where I'm perhaps wanting you to go? And so I went forward, responded to that message, and prayed with some youth leaders. And from that point on, really felt this sense of, I'm going to be a pastor. And looking back now, it seems really obvious. I was already preaching by that point and involved in quite a lot of leadership. And so and other people said it seemed quite obvious to them as well. But that was kind of the crisis experience for me. Although it wasn't a crisis, it was just a transformative experience, really.
Do you have any siblings? Or are you an only child, or what's your?
I've got a sister, younger sister. She lives up in Scotland, married to an American guy from Indiana, and yeah, they're attending one of our Nazarene churches up there.
At what point in your trajectory of ministry did you start looking at formal schooling? I mean, did you always know you were going to kind of go into that? But how did that work out for you?
It was kind of a given that if you were called into ministry, you would sign up for, at the time, it was a 4-year degree program in theology and pastoral studies, and that was just what you did. And so I didn't really explore. I was just like, I'm called to be a pastor now, so that's what I do. And so I went through the motions of secular education up to university level, and then signed on for the Nazarene Theological College and did 4 years there. Came out the other end and became an associate pastor initially for 3 or 4 years before I took on my first senior pastorate.
Yeah. And one thing I like to ask when I interview pastors who've moved through youth ministry into lead pastor role, but what are the relationships there, and in what ways do you think your experience as a youth pastor has influenced your leadership as a lead pastor, but then into a district superintendent?
I think so. I'm still involved in youth ministry now, and I think I'm one of those people that always will be. I hope so. Anyway, I think NYI would have to kick me out, and I think that's partly because of I just have a passion for young people. I love that era of life when you're moving from childhood to adulthood and asking all the big questions, trying to forge your own identity, and I love just being able to interact with that and watch that unfold. Partly because I think I just have a huge streak of immaturity, and youth ministry gives you that excuse to still get involved in the insane and the ridiculous.
Right.
And I just love all of that stuff. But I think also partly because young people, they're willing to try stuff and they're willing to engage in stuff. And sometimes there's a recklessness there, but actually sometimes there's just a willingness to have a faith that I think is something perhaps even of what Jesus meant faith like a child, just follow, because I say do. And so I think there's a few of those things. And what I would say is that I try to carry certainly that third one into my other roles. So trying to have that sense of creativity, openness to new ideas, trying things, not being afraid to fail. So I think that's definitely a strand where youth ministry has molded me, and I hold on to the things that I've learned through youth ministry and continue to learn through youth ministry in both senior pastoring and superintendency. But also even the one about the sense of immaturity and fun in a strange way as well, because I do think we can sometimes take ourselves too seriously. And I remember a lecturer at NTC once, we invited him to speak at my local church, and we invited a lecturer from each of the disciplines of theology to come and speak 1 week after the other on holiness from their discipline's perspective. And he was the pure theologian, and he came in and he brought with him, he printed off some A1 sheets of master artists' depictions of Christ. And then we hung them up around the church and had cheese and non-alcoholic wine, and basically had a bit of an art gallery type evening, pretended posh. And so it was all quite interesting as we all went around trying to look into the insights of the pictures. And then afterwards, he just pointed out to us, and he had a PowerPoint that backed it up. And he said, "How many times have you seen pictures of Jesus with anything other than an expressionless face?" And suddenly we realized, almost every picture is this somber. Yeah. And you'll occasionally see an anguished Garden of Gethsemane hanging on the cross, weeping over Jerusalem. But I've only ever seen one picture of Jesus laughing. And and not many other expressions.
That's a good point.
And he drew out and said that basically what the church has done is it has either intentionally or unintentionally, consciously or subconsciously, it's turned holiness into an absence of emotion. And the idea that you need to conquer your emotions and get onto a higher plane of spirituality by showing that you no longer have them. And like the Brits, we have this phrase, keep a stiff upper lip, or keep calm and carry on, which came out of the war. And so we've kind of mastered this, where you just don't express emotion. Whereas actually, I just imagine, I'm convinced that you can see humor in some of Jesus's remarks, and there's poignancy, and I'd love to know what his facial expressions were when he said certain things, and I can imagine him and the disciples, who was the witty one, who was the sarcastic one, and so that sense of fun that youth ministry is inevitably wrapped up in, I think adult church could learn a lot from that. Let's have fun together, let's do sport together, let's just enjoy creation together. And so those two things, I would say, are the things that I carried through from youth ministry. I'll try to, at least.
Well, that's something that had struck me when I was going through the Growing Young series with Kansas City First Church Youth Group. Is I had this, I grew up in kind of a small church, and it wasn't a large youth group, but I kind of had this mentality that youth needs to be more serious. We need to take on the mantle when we turn 18. And I kind of flipped that on its head, and still thinking through it and processing through it theologically so I could stand in correction on this statement. But I got to the point, just like you, where I thought adult church could be a little less serious, could be a little more silly, because I think we get to this point where once we get to, out of adolescence, that church is no longer fun. And that doesn't seem to be the case, when, as you said, when you're thinking back on scripture. So, along with that, I know you shared with youth ministry, but what have you done as a lead pastor and then into a district superintendent to incorporate fun? Is that sports outings? Is that getting together to go camping, hikes? I know you're an avid runner, but what are the hobbies that you incorporate as a part of kind of theological ministry? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, so my two main passions, if you like, would be travel and sport generally, but running would be the thing that I'm most into. And now, because I do long distance running, a lot of people would say there is very little fun in that, and I know what they mean when you're gasping for air and your muscles are straining. Right. There's not much laughter, but certainly the travel one, I think that's a huge thing, and I think it's one of the things that actually the Nazarene Church is ideal for. Every church, every denomination has its beautiful things, its strengths, what it adds to the kingdom of God, and its weaknesses, and sadly its ugly side as well. But I think what the Nazarene Church has as a real plus is that sense of family and connectivity, literally around the world. It's not just that we are statistically in 100 odd countries, whatever it is, and that's a vague thing. There is a connection. My family and I were on holiday in Cambodia and Vietnam a few weeks ago, and in both places, a quick WhatsApp message followed up by a couple of emails, and we connected with the local Nazarene missionaries and pastors. And my son and I went and played five-a-side football in a monsoon with a bunch of Vietnamese young people, and it was like one of the highlights of our holiday. And so I think travel is a key thing. Just saying to people, this world is incredible. Different cultures are amazing, and the Nazarene Church can enable you to experience those things through a lens of the kingdom of God. And I think there's a massive difference as well between going to, I don't know, Thailand and seeing the palace, or New York and seeing the Statue of Liberty. And those things are amazing. But actually, if you then spend the evening having pizza and conversation with the local Nazarenes in a non-tourist little part of the city, in a non-tourist cafe, you've got slightly beneath the skin of the place. And it's just a little bit more meaningful and beautiful and memorable. And so that would be key thing, just encouraging people to explore this world and its different cultures, and see what that teaches them about themselves, the different way in which society is structured, the different way in which family life unfolds, and what does that tell me about my own culture, for better or worse. There are times when I've been humbled by, you can have poverty of Southeast Asia and yet an absolute total commitment to care for the elderly generation personally and self-sacrificially. Meanwhile, you can have the wealth of the West with a commitment to just ignoring the elderly. And I think, and in reverse, there are things that those of us in the West have got right as well. And so through that sense of fun, you can then learn serious messages. But the fact that it's been through fun and exploration means that you never forget it. It's not, you've not just read it in a textbook. You've observed it, you've smelt it, you've tasted it, you've seen it, you've conversed it, and it's just embedded within you then for the rest of your life.
I got some insider information from Reverend Gilmore that you went on a run recently, and while you're on vacation around the island. He said, ask him about that story. Are you allowed to share it? He said, he didn't tell me what it was, but he said you got into a bit of trouble. I don't know if you're allowed to share it. So we can edit it out if you can't.
Yeah, I actually set off for what was supposed to be morning run around an island. We were staying on this little tiny, virtually uninhabited tropical island just off the coast of the Philippines, and and basically what started out as nice beaches and the plan of an hour circuit ended up being cliffs, jungle terrain, getting trapped in the middle of thorn bushes, and it took about 2 or 3 hours, and I was a defeated man by the time I made it back. So yeah, I mean, it was memorable. My wife at one point said to the kids, do keep an eye on the coastline, and if anything that looks like a floating body appears, tell me. And but thankfully I survived. But I can say it was the most traumatic experience of my life to
Oh
date,
my goodness.
which shows I've had an okay life.
Yeah,
but
yeah. A lot of praying on that running, huh?
Yeah, a lot of saying, okay, God, I've learned my lesson.
So I sourced some questions from our GenSec team this morning for the chat, but Gary said that you did a run in Johannesburg for General Board. I don't know if it was a 5K marathon, but tell us about that. So were you able to slip away and get a run in while you're there, or was it after General Board?
Yeah, I don't know if I should admit to missing the first 20 minutes of the finance report. If that bit gets put in, I did read it before, and so I knew what it said. And yeah, there's a thing called Park Run, which I basically say is a church for runners. And basically, it's a 5K race, takes place in probably 10,000 locations around primarily the Western world, and it's timed and it's free, and basically just tens of thousands of people do it. 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. We all set off at the same time in our different locations, and when you get into it, because you start to, when you go on holiday, you then visit the Park Run website. And so when I was at General Board, I saw there was a few kilometers away, and thought, right, yeah, I can nip away and get a South African one logged onto my profile, which is always good, and to get the unusual ones. But yeah.
So do you track all your miles each year? How many miles do you run in a year? Do you track all that?
No, I just go out and run. I'm a bit of a technophobe. I stopped in 1996 about with technology, and so I'm going to be that really, really annoying granddad who just doesn't answer whatever the latest technology is when I'm older, and so I don't really track it, but mileage, I go out two or three times a week. Just last weekend I did something called a backyard ultra, which is where it's just over a 4 mile course, but you have to do it on the hour every hour for 24 hours, and then see how long you can last. And if you last all 24, you'll have done 100 miles. And it's up a mountain and then back down it each hour. And so I managed to fit 50 miles of that, which for 46 years old, I'm happy with that. So
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah.
Well, you don't look 46, so the running's helping. So I thought you were younger
Yeah, I
than
hope
that.
so.
So growing up in Manchester, then it being kind of a more industrial, where did you develop this sense of adventure? And were you able to get out to the countryside pretty easily from where you grew up in Manchester, or where did this
Yeah,
develop?
so Ashton's about 20 minutes from the city centre and about 15 minutes from an area called the Peak District, which is just a big, vast expanse of moorland which runs across the middle of England. And so in some ways we have the best of both worlds. And when I was a kid, my parents were quite generous with me when it came to freedom. They would essentially, if I wanted to do something, they would try and find a way to make it possible. So I was quite young when they allowed me to go to London by myself, and they would always facilitate it with an adult hovering somewhere in the background. So I guess I wasn't quite as free and independent as I thought, but they certainly created this world where I felt that. And so that sense of adventure, and probably even younger, I was always, if we were staying on a little campsite, I would want to explore the forest just next door. And so I've always had that. And then just the older I've got, the wider the parameters have been for that. And yeah, I'm just inquisitive by nature, I guess.
So in your faith journey, was there any one person, book, theological construct that kind of influenced how you think about your worldview or anything like that? Is there any, got to read this book, or this person helped me out quite a bit? Anyone comes to mind?
Several, I would say. And I mean, I was blessed with quite a few people who were leaders of NYI a few years older than me, who gave me opportunities. And I remember in particular once the first district youth event that I led with a couple of friends, and we heavily subsidized it for the young people, to the extent that we pretty much bankrupted the district NYI. And I'll never forget being terrified coming to the first district council meeting after that, because I knew how much money we'd lost on this event, and I knew how much had been in the account before, and it was nearly all of it. And I'll never forget the NYI president at the time, Steve Leach. He sat there when it came to the finance report, and he said, we've invested a lot of money, but we've discovered precisely how many young people we have in our churches, because the event was so cheap that everybody came. And so essentially it was like we did a survey and discovered quite how many young people we had. And he turned what must have been a gulp into a learning experience. And as I was older, I just always remembered the grace that he had. He didn't discipline us. He didn't give us a lesson on budgeting. He just thanked us for our work, and turned a negative into a positive. And I've always carried that with me, and tried to remember that when I'm in similar circumstances now. So I think I would say that's an event. And another one would be, we used to have something called Task Force on our district, which was a little bit like Youth in Mission. And during school holidays, you could go and volunteer at another church. And I remember doing that when I was about 14. And then a guy called Paul Goss, another district leader, he drove 2 hours after work. He worked in the city of London, and he drove 2 hours after work to pick me up from this church that I've been volunteering at. Then drove 4.5 hours up to Manchester to drop me off at home, and then got in the car and drove 3.5 hours back to his house. Now, at the time, I didn't think anything of it, but when I was an adult and I suddenly realized how tired you are when you get in from work, and what he had put into my life there, and the expense of the fuel and the time, and again, that has just stuck with me, that he basically did whatever it took to invest in a young person's life because he thought I was worth it. And again, that has stayed with me, and I try to I try to replicate that now whenever I can to other young people, to just give them opportunities to grow, explore, experience things that otherwise they might not be able to.
So in your leadership, are you more of like an organic leader where you kind of, let things as develop as they should, or do you kind of come in with a systematic plan? Are you more of a systematics? This is what we're doing. What has been your journey in learning how to lead? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's it's a really good question, that. And it's if you'd have asked me that 10 years ago, I'd have said I was a very strategic leader.
Yeah.
But then over the years, I had things where people would ask me questions or make a complaint or make a compliment, just a whole mixture of experiences that made me kind of reevaluate that. And sometimes I'd be sat in some teaching on strategy, and things would stand out to me that kind of didn't quite fit. And I think I would add the word opportunistic. And so I am strategic in terms of I have a big picture vision, an idea, but it will be very big picture, broad brushstrokes, possibly vague. But I wouldn't say vague, but some might say vague. And then that's where the opportunistic side then comes in, where you just see what's coming your way, see what the opportunities are, and then seize them. And so really, sometimes it can look as though the plan has changed, but there'll be a value that is being pursued relentlessly. And it's just that the opportunity has meant that we've landed in A rather than B, or B rather than A. And so I would say strategic, but opportunistic at the same time. Certainly not rigid.
Yeah. So what are you most excited for on your district right now? What do you enjoy most about the ministry position you find yourself in?
Well, what am I most excited about? It's hard to pinpoint. So the word that I use at the moment, used it in my assembly report, use it when I'm talking with pastors gatherings. And just yesterday, we've got a new pastor that's just arrived, and a missionary volunteer couple who've come over from the States. And so I was just meeting with them for the first time and giving them a bit of an understanding of what they've arrived into. And the word that I would use is fragile. But I think you can have fragility where it's something like a vase or a piece of pottery that's about to break. And so actually the fragility is a weakness that is perhaps worrying, and you need to be looking to replace, get rid, or whatever. But the word fragile would also apply to something like some flowers coming up in spring, that all it's going to take is some large animal to come and eat them, tread on them, or a big unexpected storm to come and put a deluge of rain, and they'll just be flattened and finished. But actually their weakness is actually part of the beauty, and it's the start of their journey of potential. And that if they're nurtured correctly, that fragility is going to produce a beautiful, beautiful harvest, and lots of beautiful things for people to see, to smell, and so on. And so I think I would want to say, hopefully, optimistically, hopefully not naively, that we've got a lot of fragility, but I hope it's in the flower sense. And I'm a very strong believer in resurrection, which sounds like a statement of the obvious, because if not, I have my credentials in. But I do think that sometimes the way in which we lead ministries, and as districts lead churches as a whole, perhaps speaks as though we don't actually believe in resurrection too much, or we don't when push comes to shove, because we fight and fight and fight to keep something open, whereas actually it's died. And it might have been fruitful 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, but now it's not fruitful. And actually it needs to be allowed to die with dignity, with honor for what it has been and what it has done, with careful pastoral care for the people who are still connected to it. Of course, absolutely. But if we don't allow death, we will never see resurrection. And so I have a really strong belief that sometimes we have to allow things to die. And that doesn't mean kill. It means recognize when something is dying, and then have a belief that into that space that death brings, that God can speak life. And so we have a ministry in our district called Dove's Nest Ministry. We had a church that was planted, I think, in the 80s. It was planted with some American money, because in the town where it was, there was a large American Air Force base opened, 10,000 personnel, of which a significant percentage were churchgoers, and quite a few were Nazarene. And so there was a plant made from that. But then many years later, the Air Force Base reduced its personnel by 90%, and the church hadn't grown enough in terms of local people, local British people. And so it essentially decimated the church through no fault, no one's mistake, just through changing demographics. And so the fragment that was left of the congregation struggled on for another 10, 15 years, but they were exhausted, increasingly so, resource poor, just struggled. Good people, trying hard, no disunity, no issues, but nevertheless struggling and not really getting anywhere. And there was, as there often is in these cases, there was one particular couple who were the lay people that just kept the doors open, kept things going. And when we reached the point of accepting that this place needs to close, they were relieved, although sad, but they were relieved. And then into the space that came in their life then over the next few weeks and months, they started to pray, God, which church should we go to? What do you want for us next? And they felt God call them to start a little ministry where they would just gather household items, and then they would find people, for example, somebody who's just left prison, and they get given an apartment by the state, but no furniture. And so they would turn the apartment into a home by providing the stuff they needed, the knives, the forks, a chair, a table. And of a woman who's been a victim of domestic violence and the police have relocated her for safety, or a child that has been brought up through the care system and is now having to live independent. There are lots of different things, asylum seekers, all sorts. And they would, and so they started doing this just on a small scale. And then they had a company that rang them up, who ran a holiday centre, and just said, we're getting rid of all of our 200 and odd beds because we're renewing them. Can you do anything? Now, bearing in mind, they were running this from their house at this point. And the husband said, yes, we'll take them all. And basically, he managed to find homes for all of these beds within about 48 hours, 3 days, or something ridiculous. And then things just grew, one thing after another. And what they would do is they would provide people with the stuff, but then having done so, they would have built up a relationship, and they would just say to the person, look, we can just leave it there if you wish, but if you would like, we also run a little community for people like yourselves who don't know anybody in the area, and we go out on hikes together, we have picnics, we just have barbecues, and you're welcome to join the WhatsApp group and come along when you wish. Some people didn't, some people did, but they started to build this little community, and they got up to about 30, 40 people. And then there was nothing spiritual connected within it, other than the fact that they were Christians, and people would inevitably find that out. And then they would just say grace whenever there was food, and that was it. Then what they started to do as the community got to know each other and proper friendships developed, they then started to do things around the festivals like Harvest, Christmas, Easter, where that gave kind of a cultural permission to do something a little more spiritual. And so then they would do that, and they found that over time that provoked questions. And eventually the questions were coming so thick and fast that they said, well, would you just like us to do an exploration course on what the Bible is, on what Christianity is? And the people were like, oh yeah, absolutely, that'd be great. And so through that, they've had people come to faith, and now they have a weekly act of worship. And so the group now is still probably 30 to 40 people. It's most of whom are not yet Christians, but some are. And these are the unchurched who have come to faith. The shape of the church is not your obviously recognizable congregational church, but they do the sacraments, they pray, they worship, they minister, they serve, they give. And so it's a fresh expression of church. What it will be in the future, I do not know where it's heading. Like I say, the word fragile applies. A lot of the people are coming from complicated background lives, and so there's a lot of ebbing and flowing. But what is there now, what used to be, was a fairly traditional standard congregational church struggling to make an impact. And now you've got something of a similar size, but having a massive impact, because there's a life and a vitality and a creativity to it. And so there has been death and resurrection, and it's beautiful and it's powerful and it's exciting. And the interesting thing is that we sold the church building that had been built all those years ago, and it was a fantastic facility. And we sold it to a church plant that had started around about the time that the Air Force Base reduced its personnel. And this church plant had grown quite significantly, and it was desperate for a traditional church building. And so, as far as the kingdom goes, there was no loss. It just changed from Nazarene to this other church. And the money that we gained from the sale of that property next week, no, sorry, let me start that sentence again. The money that we gained from the property on Monday of this week, just a few days ago, we got the deeds through for a town centre property that is perfectly suited towards this furniture exchange ministry, and running a little cafe and a little men's support group, and it's right in the town centre, the most prominent building in this town, and so it's incredible. Now it is so fragile, and you could interview me in 2 years and it could all have come to nothing. I'm not delusional, but I could give you 5 or 6 stories similar to that, and they all excite me, but they're all fragile. They could all become nothing, but they are beautiful, and they could all become something that is even more beautiful than they already are, and they could all become something that is actually fruitful and multiplies. And so those are the things that give me passion at the moment, and excitement, as well as the usual douse of frustration and fear and terror as to how we're going to keep this going, and how we're going to develop leaders, and how we're going to resource this. But yeah, more excitement than anything else.
I was with a friend yesterday, and he really for the last month or so, I mean, he's been doing video game streaming, which is a world I'm not used to, for a while now. And really he designed his whole profile as clean games, clean, all that stuff. But then he started incorporating scripture, and he's a believer. But he said to me about a month ago, he said, Nate, I feel like I'm going to start he's got a following, but a Bible study on Wednesday mornings. And we were walking last night. And again, these are maybe a couple believers in this Bible study. A lot of people are just curious folks. But I found the questions from people who are unchurched, probably never gone to church, actually kind of difficult to answer. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It was one of those things where it's interesting that we think if someone's coming with an elementary question about faith, it's going to get an elementary answer. And that's not so sometimes. Sometimes the world comes with some pretty deep questions. In your experience, do you assess some of the is there similar questions you're getting as a leader that you're finding difficult to answer, easy to answer? Are you finding, in your context as the world is looking a certain way, that people are asking certain questions, or is it kind of a panoply? He and I both kind of came to the thing that it's interesting. 50 years ago, people were just more biblically literate in America, but that doesn't mean that their questions aren't hitting at underlying things in Scripture. But anyways.
Yeah. It's so one of the things that I really miss about local pastoring is that day-to-day nitty-gritty interaction with the local community. I'm now interacting with people who are interacting with the local community. But for myself, I'm that one degree of separation. And that's partly why my wife and I have re-engaged 2, maybe 3 years ago now, back in the local youth group, just in order for me to be able to just keep getting my hands dirty and all that stuff, because facing those questions, not just theoretically in a pastor's gathering conversation, but actually because a young person is asking you.
Yeah.
My son's best friend diagnosed with cancer in the first year of high school, and it's touch and go for a time, and you can have your theological answers, but when it's the pastoral reality of a 13, 14, 15-year-old going through chemo, facing death, and those theological answers are sometimes very, very hard to say without feeling as though you're saying empty words, or they don't quite hit the nail on the head. And so there's those usual questions that keep coming up, and I think the biggest one that I probably struggle with is around the area of addiction, because I think I understand that God, I can reconcile with the idea that God isn't going to heal everybody with cancer or everybody with leprosy. Or I get that the miracles are miracles partly because they are exceptional, and so they are the exception to the rule, quite literally. But when it comes to illnesses that result in sinful behavior, and I know that God is always for holiness, that's where I really struggle with. And again, I'm aware that there's the free will factor, but anybody on my district will know, and anybody who spends any time will know, I have a background. My late teens and most of my 20s were sadly massively marred by a really serious pornography addiction that could have just wrecked me for ministry, and if it wasn't for the grace of a DS and my wife, would have done. And so that asks massive questions as to why isn't the miracle guaranteed when it's a question of sinfulness or holiness. And so those big questions of grappling with what does sanctification mean for the addict, whether that's pornography, drugs, or whatever. Because I think if you speak, my local pastoring ministry, a lot of the Nazarene churches in Britain are located in places that you perhaps wouldn't choose to live in by worldly standards. And so there tends to be quite a lot of poverty, low socioeconomic indicators, deprivation, addiction, and all that goes with that. And our church was massively interacting with that. And so, you're asking those questions where, when you've got your 10th, your 15th, and counting heroin addict who has accepted the gospel because they know they're a sinner, they know they are lost, they know they are broken, and they are desperate not to be how they are. But there's inevitably massive trauma in their past, in their childhood. They didn't plan their life to be where they were at. They were born into circumstances that gave them a real unfortunate and unlikely chance to succeed. And of course, there's choice in there. Of course, there were moments when they could have made different decisions, but the odds were stacked against them. And you see people embracing the gospel. But what I found is that with people who've got their life together, getting them to consider the gospel was very difficult. For people who come from an addiction background, getting them to consider the gospel is often quite easy because they are in desperate need of a savior. But it's the discipleship that's harder afterwards, of them being able to work through the very, very deep-rooted insecurities, traumatic experiences, guilt, shame, mistakes. And so those would be the massive questions that most quite literally keep me up at night at times when I wake up grappling with the mistakes of my younger years and stuff.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I have found that both personally and when I've talked to others that are going through, I like how you put that, addictions. It's hellish. It's very rare, in fact, never, for me to actually talk to someone deeply about such a thing and they enjoy it. And so I sometimes remember going back to the outset of this conversation. There is a joy in Christianity, and the church showing that is important. But no, that's good. I segue into another sourced question. This one comes from my sister, but she said, ask him his favorite meal he's had while he's traveled abroad, and maybe his most unfavorite or funniest meal, or something that he wishes he wouldn't have eaten as you've traveled.
Huh. My favorite meal, boy. My favorite meal actually happened at Nazarene Theological College, Manchester, but it was not an English meal. We hosted one of the when NYI for a period was experimenting with satellite sites around the world. We hosted one of them at the college, and we had this idea because Eurasia is blessed with just having so many different cultures, and so we were having almost every country in Europe represented, and a little bit further afield as well. And so we decided that for our last night, we were going to announce to people earlier in the conference that if they wanted to prepare something that was a dish that represented their nation, they could give us the ingredients, and we would find the ingredients. And that in itself was a 4 or 5 hour adventure, traveling around Manchester to try and find where was the best Greek shop, and all these ingredients we didn't know what they stood for. And so we expected one or two to step forward, but actually pretty much everybody, and it kind of caught the imagination. And NTC only had about 4 or 5 kitchens, and so people were fighting over kitchens, and I mean it was probably a health and safety nightmare, certainly a food hygiene certificate nightmare. But in the evening, when you walked into the room, and everybody had they'd seen this as a chance to do their country proud, and some of the artistic presentations of how the food had been presented, some of the tastes. So it was just like a multi-sensory collection of cultures, smell, taste, everything. And it was just, you didn't know where to start, you didn't know where to end, and you would just go around and just take a couple of spoons of each thing because you didn't want to fill yourself up. And you just tried probably 20, 25 dishes from around the world. And I remember just looking at that and thinking, this is kingdom of heaven. This is just, it's amazing just from a simple taste experience, but actually what it represents about our unity and our coming together, but our diversity and our celebration of that. And it was just, so that's my favorite meal, even though I only had it on my doorstep. And my least favorite, well, I kind of don't know who's going to listen to the podcast and how far it's going to go, and so I don't want to insult anybody.
No,
but I would say
that's a tough question. So if you don't want to share it, I get it. Yeah, for risk of
I would
being
say
rude, I guess.
a tactic that I have learned, and I won't say the countries where I deploy this most, is carry a bottle of water, because if you shove something in your mouth and then take a swig, you can swallow it. And you can deal with the repercussions in the toilet afterwards, but you can get it down your throat. And there are a fair few occasions when I can remember having to deploy a lot of water to get what has been presented in front of me down my throat. Some funny.
That was a good way to put it right there. I don't think you offended anyone with that one. So where's a place you haven't been, or where's a place you're wanting to go to next? Where's your next travel adventure that you're mapping out in your mind?
Well, the place that I haven't been to yet is South America. That's the only continent I've not visited. And I'm not saying I won't go there before, but I've kind of got that earmarked as soon as my youngest child leaves home and it's a bit cheaper to travel, that my wife and I will take a bit of a, maybe fly to Mexico and travel to the bottom of Argentina and just
that'd be really cool.
Just travel. So I've kind of like got that earmarked for the future. My next one is going to be quite a poignant trip. We've got our Eurasia regional conference in November, and it's in Albania. And Albania is actually the first country that I visited without my parents when I was 16. So that was really when my my love of traveling solo as an independent person was stimulated. So I'm really looking forward to going back, and also because when I did visit Albania when I was 16, it had very recently come out of communism and become an open country. And so now, 30 years later, I imagine I'm going to see quite a lot of transformation and change and progress. And I know I'm going to meet the person that was my translator when I was 16, because
That's
she's
really
now
cool. Yeah.
a pastor of one of our Nazarene churches, and so that's going to be poignancy. And interestingly, my son is 16, and he's coming with us to the conference, and that passing on of the mantle is
Yeah.
not lost on me. And
Yeah.
hoping he finds it as life changing as I did.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. I had the privilege of going to the Global Theology Conference in Argentina, Pilar, this last time, and Dr. Jorge Hulka was a wonderful host, and he may listen to this and say, Nate, no, I'm just kidding, but he has said to me since, if you need to come down and travel there, you've got a place to stay. So it's a great, beautiful campus. So keep that in mind. You probably already have those
Will do.
contacts, but it's a wonderful place to be. But
Brilliant.
well, in closing, actually, I'm gonna give a shout out because I made a mistake on my last podcast with Reverend Gilmore. Michelle Lynham did send me all his Advent materials. I had neglected to think that she hadn't sent it, but she had sent it to me, and she's been a wonderful. So shout out to Michelle Lynham. I'm giving that shout out now. But Reverend McCann, any shout outs, any things that you want to keep on your radar, anything that we can put in the show notes for people to keep track of your district, anything you're thinking about, and in a closing thought, what can we be praying for? What can our listeners, as they stay connected with you, be praying for you for?
I think shout out would be, I know that Britain, as a result of our rather shameful past of colonization and going around the world and treating people abominably, but as a result of that, it does mean that a lot of countries have a bit of a fascination with England, with the British Isles, and feel a connection or a desire to see London or whatever. And so I would say that feel free to partner that with connecting with the Nazarene Church. So if anybody wants to bring a youth in mission team, a work and witness team, or come and volunteer, then please do get in touch. We've got all sorts of things that are going on, and we are at the tip of the spear when it comes to post-Christendom and what that means and the impact of that, which does mean that we are a fascinating insight into perhaps what is coming in other places or has come in other places, and it does mean as well that we are very, very we're thin on the ground with people in many places, and so your help would be massively appreciated, as well as I think it would be an exciting opportunity for someone. So I think that would be my shameless shout out and promotion. I think prayer for it would be around this issue of fragility, that essentially we need the Holy Spirit to do what only the Holy Spirit can do. We can set things up, we can do ministries, there's lots of activity that we can do, but only the Holy Spirit can transform a person's heart. And it is often a long, slow process. People talk about how much faith it takes to persevere in, say, a creative access country where you've got the fear for your life, and absolutely it does. I cannot even begin to comprehend those type of pressures. But there is also the pressure of, if you volunteer to do Sunday school or youth ministry in a post-Christian country, you quite literally know that you could minister for 40 years and not see a single person come through to faith in Jesus. And you would just do your Sunday school class and do your Sunday school class to one generation after another. And then when you're elderly, not have anybody that you can say, oh, they're going strong in their faith. And that is a different type of perseverance, but nevertheless a remarkable perseverance. And so we minister here with an awareness that is the struggle, and that is the time that we have been born into, and we need to pray for a transformation spiritually within our country. We need to pray for a change within the heart. The Britain as a whole views Christianity as part of our shameful colonial past, something that we have left behind, and we're pleased to have left behind. And so trying to encourage people into Christianity, it is a very, very tough thing to do. And I'm aware that every mission field has its tough things. So I'm not trying to say we've got the hardest. I'm just saying this is how it is hard in our circumstances. Others have it different. And so I would say pray for these fragile ministries where there are non-Christian people engaging and exploring. And there are people who have come to faith, but their faith is fledgling. It's young, it's fragile. And there are people who are leading these ministries, but it is very much dependent upon them. There isn't a depth of leadership. There isn't the ability to see the succession thinking, who will pick it up beyond them. They're ministering in faith, looking for that person. So pray into the fragility, that we'll be able to keep sensitive to the Spirit's leading, and that the Spirit would do a move that only the Spirit can do.
Thank you for sharing all that. I know that these are all ways in which we connect to a larger global world, and I think that's you embody that as a person. You're traveling. I think you said it at the beginning, but it's fascinating that when you travel in the Nazarene world, you realize just how large our family is. You can connect to that. So I hope that our global audience, as they're listening to that, will be praying for you in your context. So I appreciate you sharing this time with us. Your afternoon, my morning. But thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Yes, appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to the Holiness Today podcast. If you enjoyed this production and wish to hear more, visit holinesstoday.org/podcast or find us on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts.